The Palo Alto City Council this week took some pretty determined steps to address the housing crisis, approving the launch of the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan, as well as a housing memo, both aimed at bringing more housing into the city. So we're going to talk about that, unpack both of the topics. And Gennady, the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan, that addresses which area of town?
As the name would imply, it's a specific part of the Ventura neighborhood, which is kind of close to what's known as the Fright site for its eponymous tenant. It's this kind of sprawling campus, which in addition to Fry's includes a scattering of smaller business that I know you and a few other coworkers toured earlier this week.
Yes, we did. Shoe leather reporting.
Shoe leather reporting.
Figure out what was there.
But it's a little bit south of the Cal Avenue area, and it's pretty close to an area of El Camino where the city has been approving quite a few projects on a development by development basis. So I guess this one big impetus for this plan is that it'll give the city a chance to kind of look at the area in its totality rather than continue approving the way it has in the past.
Yeah, there's been some really major changes there. There's the Harold Hobach 195 Page Mill Road, which is mixed use. There's high density housing there, 82 apartments over offices. There's another project kind of north of there that's under construction right now.
Right.
AOL left, Cloudera came in.
Yeah, there's 441 Page Mill, which is taking down the Northway building with the rental units, which is pretty close to it.
Yeah.
Close to the former AOL building. Yeah, so there's already been quite a bit of change, and for that reason, there's been recognition in the city for quite some time now that there should be an area plan for this area, not just the Fry site, but the area immediately around it, and more broadly speaking, the whole kind of Cal Avenue area. And needless to say, things haven't gone according to the plan. We're coming up with that vision, but this week was a restart of sorts with a more narrow focus.
Okay. Well, I'm interested in talking about coordinated area plans. That's a mouthful. Coordinated area plans or concept plans in general, because Palo Alto's used quite a few over the years for different areas. SOFA and SOFA 2, which is south of Forest area in downtown, was certainly a big one when the Palo Alto Medical Foundation left that area. California Avenue has had a concept plan that was actually approved or kind of finalized in 2012 after some public meetings.
It was ultimately not approved, but it was approved. It was approved by a committee, or by the It was worked on. It was worked on. They came up with it. It was drafted. I'll say that it was drafted, but then once it got to the council level, it got relegated to the dustbin of history. But I think to that point, I feel like you want to talk about coordinated area plans, and I think the city's kind of record with coordinated area plans is very mixed at best.
Yeah.
Like I feel like SOFA is usually brought up as kind of the big success story because it did allow the city to ultimately build a heritage park and kind of have all sorts of residential development in the area that used to be occupied by Palo Alto Medical Foundation. But just looking back to some of the stories from 2003 when the plan was adopted, here's one quote about it. The SOFA planning process has dragged out over a 5-year period during which at least $1 million of city funds have been spent in staff time. This is from the Chamber of Commerce. They've asked the City Council to kind of prevent this contentious and expensive process from occurring again. So this is a success story.
That was 14 years. You have a short-term memory.
Yeah, so it's almost like a buyer beware.
Yeah.
On some of the less successful ones, we have East Meadow and California Avenue, which are the two most recent plans, and neither of them have gone very far. So, which is to say, it's pretty encouraging that the City Council has had a unanimous vote on this and that they're gung-ho about it. But to me, the big test is where is this going to lead and what will be implemented. And unfortunately, recent history with area plans doesn't give me that much room to hope.
Yeah, so in some cases, the planning process leads to enormous change. And in some cases, it leads to a plan that sits on the shelf. And I think one of the difficulties, it seems, is that the city can sketch out plans or design guidelines, how bike and pedestrian pathways should go, but it's ultimately up to private developers to make these things happen. The city can only incentivize, to a certain degree with zoning regulations and all of that. Now, the California area plan, it was already sketched out. Like you said, it was put on the shelf, but there were 4 public meetings between 2010 and 2012. They looked at this area, Park Boulevard, as well as the Fry site. They did something with the Park Boulevard area, calling it a tech boulevard.
They tried to. I mean, the plan kind of envisioned the park area as a place where like small tech companies could set up shop, and they were going to revisit some zoning regulations to maybe allow more commercial development. And I think that part of it proved to be like the most controversial element once the plan got to the council. Like I remember Pat Burt in particular, a former council member who also worked in the SOFA plan way back when. He saw this as like a huge change that's going to hugely densify this area. And I think there was general recognition after that during the time that this took to formulate this plan, the politics of the city have changed so much that like the current council can no longer support it. So we had a situation where you had years of community meetings, sometimes really heated ones, sometimes well-attended ones, that led to a work product that basically, in the final step, gets tossed aside, and it's almost like the money has been spent. So it's a cautionary tale.
So is there anything different now, whether it's politically on the council or in the community, that would lead people to think that maybe the Ventura plan could actually lead to the kind of change that these plans are launched to bring about?
I think a few things are different about this one. First of all, the process is different, and I know it's a little bit of a boring concept to talk about, but I feel like there's going to be a working group in this plan, much like there was in SOFA. So in SOFA, you had people like Chop Keenan working with people like Karen Holman, and residents and developers and everybody working together. That hasn't happened on Cal Avenue and East Meadow. That was more just community meetings. It was more staff and consultant driven. So here, I think there will be more ownership in the product from the people participating and who will be impacted the most. So I think that's a good thing. It might take longer, Another thing that's good about this plan, I think, that's going to make it possibly more effective is that at least in the initial phases, the Sobrado organization, which owns the Fry site, is behind this. Like it opposed it a few years ago when the council was considering Cal Avenue, because there were some questions about Fry's future from the council's perspective and things like that. Now Sobrado is not only supporting it; it's actually paying the matching fund for the $600,000+ grant. So this would cost the city nothing if they pretty much get it done within the next 18 months, which is another area of concern that we can get to if you want to, because I don't think that's going to happen. But the fact
processes in Palo Alto tend to stretch out.
Well, it's 5 years for SoFi, and here they're planning to do this in 18 months, which is wishful. It's wishful. So, but I think having a developer, to your point, buying into it is kind of a big deal, since they have the power to do something with the site.
Yeah. It seems like the community members, at least some of them, are very stoked about this from the Ventura Neighborhood Association. So in addition to corporations and Fry's, there are automotive repair shops. There's a whole stretch of like single-family homes. There's multifamily complexes. And some of those people have come out to the council meetings to give their opinion. What did they say that they're looking for in this change? Well,
I think they're really excited about having a seat at the table and determining like the neighborhood's future, because I think Ventura is in some ways one of the more kind of aggrieved neighborhoods in Palo Alto. Like it's got probably more affordable housing than some of the other areas. Again, using that term in a very relative way, very relative way. They don't have a lot of park space. They have Bulware Park that they're trying to. It's pretty small and it's not really that well used, with RVs lining it. There's an AT&T owned site that the city recently that the city wants to use to expand the park, but they're used to not having as many amenities as some of the other neighborhoods. And at the same time, they're seeing like a few blocks away in El Camino all these new developments coming up, and they don't really have a say in that aside from 3 minutes you get at a council meeting. And so their feeling is with this plan, they can get in there early and basically establish a vision, and then hopefully with Sobrado's support and the council's support, work towards implementing that vision and come up with the kinds of parks and types of kind of well-scaled residential development that most people would like to see.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just wondering, is the city plan on collecting community feedback? Is it just through meetings, or are they going to have some sort of committee, or?
Well, the working group is one vehicle. That's going to, and basically the city's code for coordinated area plans actually has working group as one of the factors. It's 7 to 14 people. Council's going to appoint them, so generally these kinds of meetings are open to the public, so people will be able to sit in, similar to what happened in the comprehensive plan update. And you could be sure before anything advances, there's going to be reviews at a planning commission meeting. There's going to be workshops. There's going to be.
I know, and you said 18 months. That's why I was wondering.
Well, yeah, it's kind of warp speed when it comes to advanced planning in Palo Alto. It might seem like a long time, but But in accepting this grant money, the city pretty much committed that we're going to follow this process, and 18 months is kind of how long it's going to take.
Is that specified in the grant requirement, that it has to be within a certain time frame?
Yes, within 18 months of the kickoff date, which is going to be this spring. So 18 months with a shot clock beginning, like maybe 5-6 months, I don't know, whenever they actually start getting to work on it.
Yeah.
But considering how long it's taken in the past, there's a good chance that it's going to spill over that time, which means the city will probably have to provide some of its own money at some point. But again, that's just a pessimistic projection based on recent experience
Just
with
the
area
reporter's
plans.
tired view. Now, one of the things that I think is a major factor here is just the potential for housing. On the Fry side, it was identifying the housing element as perhaps supporting 220 or so
Yeah.
new homes. And it seems like, unlike maybe the East Meadow concept plan, this actually has some sort of driver that is at the top of everyone's list, like we need more housing or we need more affordable housing. So is it pretty much guaranteed that whatever gets built there would be high density, just because the housing element says it could host that many homes?
Absolutely guaranteed, absolutely not. Nothing's absolutely guaranteed, but I do think housing is kind of the number one driver of having this kind of redevelopment happen at the Fry site. I mean, you mentioned housing is a number one priority, and it's kind of hard to argue with that based on everything the council has done. And at the same time, the Fry site is the number one opportunity for housing. So you have these two things converging, and as you mentioned, the housing element, I think, gives that site like a realistic capacity of 221 units. Possibly, it could be up to 249 if it gets developed at 20 units per acre, which is still below what the zoning enables. It's RM30 zoning.
Wow.
So it could be 250. It could be even more than 300, although that's unlikely because that would require making pretty much everything housing. But so I think that's going to be the number one thing to look forward in the new plan, like how much housing is going to be. I think it inevitably is going to be a huge boost of housing by Palo Alto's recent standards.
Okay.
But there's also kind of thoughts of getting more bike amenities, getting a little park out there. So there's things that even people who don't favor heavy growth are probably going to like.
I know down in San Jose, they've taken some like old canneries and turned those into housing. Now, this one isn't very tall, the Fry's site, so I don't know if there's going to be any historic preservation type efforts there, but that would be pretty interesting if they would try to combine what's already there with the new plans.
Yeah, that would be neat. And I also think it's worth saying that there were a few council members who were recently elected, both the last election and the prior one, who were really gung-ho about coordinated area plans, who see this as kind of the model forward for planning, not just here, but for downtown and for, maybe another section, California Avenue, kind of closer to the business district, maybe even other areas, having neighborhoods come in, decide. Corey Wolbach's talked about it a few years ago, Adrian Fine. So I feel like there's a lot riding on this, not just for the Fry site, but for how the city goes into the future with planning for its neighborhoods.
Okay, so this could have a significance beyond the actual physical 39 acres.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Well, great, thanks.
Since we're talking about housing, can you tell me about the housing memo that the council passed this week?
Oh, what a transition.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, just to underscore, the importance of housing, just, the same meeting that they talked about the Fry side, they also discussed this new memo by two of the people we just mentioned, Corey Wolbach and Adrian Fine, along with Vice Mayor Liz Niss. And basically, it's in a sense, it's a rebuttal of sorts to another memo that was produced a few weeks ago by three other council members, Karen Holman, Lydia Kuhn, and Tom Du Bois. Whereas the prior one was focused on retaining current units and kind of rental protections, this one is all about build new housing, and this was the biggest issue in their platform. And so it doesn't have any specific initiative that it says the city has to do now, but it does identify about 12 different areas that planners should explore in the next year or two. And some of them are hugely significant and, are expected to be pretty controversial once it gets closer to implementation. So, that's a much broader memo. It's not as focused as the Fry side, but it definitely touches on some of the same themes.
I know that there's different options that they plan on looking at. What are some of those options?
Well, one of the big ones is increasing floor area ratio, allowing housing projects to build at a denser, to basically have more density. And if you followed what's been happening in Palo Alto for the last decade, that's never not controversial. If like a 60-unit development for low-income seniors could go down in flames in a referendum, it's kind of, there is a density issue, in many neighborhoods. So So that's just one of 12. There's reducing parking requirements near transit hubs, which again would be controversial, I imagine, because this idea that people can move to Palo Alto and not own cars, so not everybody's sold on it. There hasn't been any proven success stories with these developments locally. I mean, people cite studies from other cities, which generally tend to be denser, but again, it's a lot of unknowns. And things like heights, it's not proposing exceeding the 50-foot height limit, but it does suggest that in certain areas there could be height concessions made to developments that have a lot of below market rate housing, things like that. So there's just some. We can go on, but
So some of the areas around transit, I mean, they've long been talked about for higher density housing, like pedestrian-oriented PTOD areas. So in some ways, it doesn't seem like this is newer. Are they just thinking about radically expanding where those areas are, or just doubling down on the incentives that they give to developers to create denser housing?
I think both. I think one of the proposals this year is to exactly what you just said, expand and augment the PTOD, the pedestrian transit-oriented district, which gives developers more flexibility for building close to transit sites. So they could make the district bigger, they could enhance the incentives, all of those things. And again, this is just one sentence in a memo, so it's hard to read too much into it, but it's one of those things that staff's going to come back on a work plan to kind of start kind of exploring this further.
Yeah. The parking relaxation, the relaxation of parking requirements just seems like that is always a lightning rod because there's already traffic that's stacking up on El Camino and Page Mill. So the idea of building housing that's car light or car absent, how has that played in the past so far with the council and with the community?
I feel like 3 or 4 years ago it would have been laughed out of the chambers. But I feel like the conversation has kind of evolved with the council election, with the worsening of the housing crisis, and with the new project that was proposed at the corner of El Camino and Page Mill, which is one of the most congested intersections, and which the council was somewhat surprisingly receptive to, which is like 60 car light units, micro units. Although people would argue they're not really micro. It's like
it's micro by suburban standards.
Yeah, much smaller units that the city has typically had. So, so the fact that the council was somewhat accepting, and it hasn't gone through a formal approval or anything.
Yeah.
But so that, I mean, I feel like the conversation has kind of shifted. So at least there's a little more openness on the council to explore it. But in the past, there's very little in terms of like case studies to demonstrate that it's been successful in Palo Alto.
Yeah.
So they have the memo. Do you have any idea when they might start moving ahead and exploring the different options, or?
Yeah, well, the next step is for the planning director, Hillary Gittleman, to come back with a work plan, which is going to show exactly here's how we're going to explore all these things. And then the council will look at this work plan and they will kind of decide, based on how much time and resources each of these will take, what are our biggest priorities. And I feel like at the end, the things that they're going to work on probably immediately are the ones that are less controversial, I imagine. Like, for example, one of the things that happened a few years ago after the Maybell thing is that they basically abolished planned community zones.
Yeah.
So you can't introduce a project anymore that doesn't comply with zoning unless you kind of, apply for a zone change. But so one of the proposals here is to kind of bring back PC zoning in a sense that you will give projects an opportunity to have retail on the ground floor and housing on the top floors, which currently there's no zoning in the city that accommodates that, which is kind of surprising because those are the two things that the council likes the most.
They've been talking about mixed use forever.
But yeah, so I assume if staff comes back and says, let's work on creating a zone that'll give retail on the bottom and housing on the top, I can't imagine too many council members would oppose it. But when it comes to, car light developments, that's a whole other can of worms that might be a little further down the line.
Yeah, show us the proof first.
Exactly.
So I'm a little curious about the kind of ongoing difference in philosophy on the council. As you referenced, Koo, Holman, and Du Bois wanted to look at rental aids, rental protections. They were kind of going in that direction. And Holman even brought it back up this past Monday, if there could be something included in the memo motion. But that was not supported by the majority. Are we seeing sort of a 6-3 split then? 6-3, 5-4?
6-3, 5-4, kind of bit. Yeah, there's a bit of a philosophical split. It revolves around one term that people have a hard time grasping. affordable housing. We're not talking about BMR, below market rate. We're not talking about the kind of, the like the Maybell project. We're talking about housing for which very low income workers would not qualify for under BMR, but which is still a teacher, a firefighter, or a police officer, or whatever, still would not be able to afford. So
So we're talking about the $800,000 house instead of the $2 million house?
something like that. And the people who submitted this memo, the Adrian Fine and Corey and Liz Ness, basically, their take is we need BMR housing and we need more affordable market rate housing. And the other side is basically saying that's an oxymoron. There's no affordable housing short of BMR. So what exactly do you mean? And it's like, are we just going to relax zoning laws so you can have more like penthouses and more like really expensive condos that the kind of people who want to stay in the city won't be able to afford anyway? So I think everyone pretty much agrees that having workforce housing is a good thing.
Yeah.
But I think one camp, the philosophy tends to be more focused on workforce housing, whereas the other camp tends to be workforce housing is very valuable. We also need a ton of other types of housing to make it possible. So I think that's kind of where the big split is now.
Okay. It seems like defining workforce housing even is kind of a slippery thing, because like who exactly can afford this, and is this exactly what they want to be living in? Some people mentioned, firefighters need to live here, but they they can't afford it, and then they go to the Central Valley where they have land. And
Yeah, it's actually kind of, firefighters, I don't know if I brought up the best example, because in some cases they make more than the city manager, a few cases,
Right.
but I think we're talking more like teachers, basically most city hall workers, who don't make it the high end, that kind of stuff. And you're right, it is slippery, and I think they tried to actually make it a little less slippery this past week. Karen Holman actually suggested attaching like an actual score, like having affordable market rate housing be defined as somebody making 120, 140, 160% of
Sure, put some
median
limits
income.
on it.
Yeah, but that kind of fizzled. I feel like
okay.
people thought it's a little too prescriptive, the
Okay.
majority. So to be continued.
To be continued. All right. Well, that's the state of housing in Palo Alto right now. We will see you next week on Behind the Headlines. And if you want to continue to read about housing, traffic, and all the other local news, you can go to paloaltoonline.com. If you want to comment on this topic or any, go to paloaltoonline.com/square. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So check us out there, and we'll see you next week.